Hi and welcome to another grumpy video. A while ago I did a video about a book series that started out good and, in my opinion, went downhill. Funnily enough, that was also a vampire series. Then again, I used to be really into vampire fiction, so I suppose it's not that surprising. Another series I read that had a vampire and supernatural theme was the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series by Laurell Hamilton. I first read this series quite a few years ago, probably around the time that vampire fiction was becoming a bit more mainstream, and I particularly liked this series because it didn't feature a Buffy-style female who was a typical high school teenager one day. Until then she became a kick-ass vampire hunter pretty much out of the blue. One day she's a regular girl, next thing you know she's got this ability to defeat hordes of vampires with years, decades or even centuries more experience than she had. And okay, maybe I'm being a bit unfair to point out that a book about vampires wasn't realistic, but hey, I'm a big contradiction, you'll get used to that. Also, I used Buffy as an example, simply because it's a well-known example, but that series was by no means the only one that used that particular plot device to make vampire fiction more accessible to the mainstream audience. But the Anita Blake series stood out to me because, for one thing, Anita was an adult rather than a school child, and she was also flawed both physically and mentally by her upbringing and some of her experiences as an adult. She was also not the outgoing popular type and struggled with some human interaction. She was also unusual because she was a necromancer. This means she had the ability to animate the dead. And in the opening book, Guilty Pleasures, she was working as a necromancer by contract. She would settle questions that remained after people had died, sometimes without a will. She would raise these people from their graves and settle things once and for all. And if I remember rightly, the information that she recorded on these occasions was legally binding. Aside from probate work, she would also take private clients who needed a question asking that could only be answered by someone who had inconveniently died before they could be asked. But I would say that these were subplots throughout the series, which focused in all the books on her work as a licensed vampire executioner. So in this world, vampires are real and they are officially recognised as real. And in times before this first book began, vampires and other supernatural beings had been accepted as real. However, they hadn't had legal status. So this meant that in the past, it had been perfectly legal to kill, or should I say permanently destroy, vampires and some other non-human creatures. But before this series begins, this had changed. Vampires had been given some rights. You could no longer simply hunt them just because they existed. They had the right to exist without harm, and you couldn't just kill them just because. That said, they didn't quite enjoy the status of a regular human being. Vampires could be executed in some circumstances. Anita, who had originally killed vampires without permission because she didn't need it, had become licensed by the state to execute them if she had a legal order permitting it. So for instance, if some vampire was running amok and killing innocent people, it would be her job to seek them out and kill them. But this was a new way of doing things that didn't sit well with some people. Not everybody believed that vampires should have rights. Even Anita at the beginning of the series was slightly on the fence about this issue. Although she complied with the new rules on vampire rights, she seemed to miss the old days when she didn't need official permission to dispatch troublesome vampires. But things had changed and she did adapt, and she also maintained civil relationships with some of the vampires that she knew. One of these was called Jean-Claude, and he was a master vampire of the city. From the beginning of the series, Jean-Claude wanted Anita to be more than just a business-related associate. And to start with, Anita was very repulsed by the idea of having a relationship with him. She thought of him as a walking corpse and did not believe that vampires were appropriate boyfriend material. Despite the fact that it was clear at times that there was a bit of a mutual attraction between them, initially this wasn't that strong from her point of view. But over the series it did start to grow, even though she did continue to fight against it. In her determination to somehow live a normal life, despite her anything but normal career and supernatural abilities, she eventually began seeing a man, I think it was around book 5 or 6, called Richard. To her dismay though, he turned out to be not quite as regular a bloke as she had initially thought. Although she was usually pretty good at picking up when people were not just human, she failed at first to realise that Richard was a werewolf. After she did find out, she did stay with him, but Jean-Claude, who was angry that she had always refused to go out with him on the basis that she didn't want to date anyone who wasn't a human, somehow managed to insist that she had to give him the opportunity to try and win her as well. So basically she had to agree to date both of them before she made a choice over which one she wanted to be with exclusively. So cue the love triangle. Yes, the dreaded love triangle. These days, the inclusion of a love triangle in books is considered by a lot of people to be an overused and tiresome plot device, and I can't say I disagree with that. However, at the time of reading these books, it wasn't one I'd come across over and over again, so at the time I wasn't as fed up of it as I am now. But this series took the love triangle to a whole new level. To begin with, the triangle was Anita, Richard and Jean-Claude. Towards the end of the series, as it was when I first read it, Anita eventually finished with Richard and continued to see Jean-Claude. Not exactly because she'd made her choice, but more because she'd fallen out with Richard for other reasons. Now, when I say the end of the series as it was, what I mean by that is that when I first read this series, it consisted of 8 books, and after finishing the 8th book, I thought the series was done. And then book 9 came out. This book seemed to be a bit different, and Anita went away on a job with a slightly strange hitman called Edward, who had been a recurring bit character throughout the first 8 books. The 9th book, however, revealed more about Edward than perhaps the reader had wanted to know. Or maybe that's just me. So I kind of viewed the 9th book as a bit of an add-on, spin-off, standalone book. Until book 10. Around the time book 10 was published, the author had just begun a new series featuring a different supernatural world and new characters, and this was called the Meredith Gentry series. I think I've got this up here somewhere actually. Yeah, here we go. This is a Meredith Gentry book. So I tried the first book of this series, and it was okay if you like that sort of thing, but it wasn't really for me, so I didn't bother reading any more in the series, which in the book I read was mainly focused on the title character needing to get pregnant for political reasons, which I'll admit the exact details of elude me. It's been a long time since I read it. Anyway, the Meredith Gentry series was very different to the Anita Blake series. Anita was a bit of a prude. I mean, she wasn't a virgin, but after an unpleasant experience in her younger days, she'd stayed celibate and a little bit frustrated ever since. And this determination not to jump into a physical relationship with anybody was probably a part of her sarcastic charm for me. That and not having to wade through pages of squelchy, vomit-inducing bedroom lambada details. Meredith, on the other hand, was getting it on, in the name of politics, of course, at every opportunity. Sadly, from my point of view, she had plenty of opportunities. If you'd removed every sex scene from that book, it would have been a leaflet with a very big font. But the Anita Blake series hadn't been like that until book 10. Somewhere around this time, the author, for whatever reason, had Anita, I don't know the right word, infected, afflicted or something with a spell. Whatever it was, it possessed her and compelled her to seek out sexual partners with decreasing discrimination. And it was fine, it wasn't really her, she had to do it, she had to, or else something would happen. It's been a while, so I forget exactly what it was. But it was bad, so she just had to. This thing, whatever it was called the Ardour, and it turned Anita from a mildly frustrated, sarcastic, unsociable person into somebody who had to jump into bed with all kinds of people, human and otherwise, on an increasingly regular basis, which to me was very similar to the writing style of the Meredith Gentry series. The series had already tried and decided not to continue. So maybe I sound like a big old prudish, censorship-loving, down with that sort of thing old git. And I am a bit, but it's not that. I understand there's a market for it, and I defend the right of people to read and or watch that sort of thing if they so wish. I know people seem to like it, I know it's popular. I mean, the 50 Shades obsession has shown that some people clearly find this an enjoyable genre, but it's just not for me. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't reject a book for having a sex scene or a romantic subplot, as long as it's not the main plot, as long as the sex scene doesn't go on for 6 chapters, as long as the sex scene doesn't take so long that you can't remember what the rest of the plot was. But for me, that's what happened with these books. I think I got up to about book 13 or 14, there's somewhere up there anyway, before I gave up and realised it probably wasn't going to happen, and it wasn't going to return to the style that I'd enjoyed in the beginning. By then I would read the books with difficulty, ploughing through relentless, unnecessarily detailed accounts of Anita's extremely regular bedroom activities with increasing amounts of people, and by the end of the book I genuinely had no idea what the plot had been. When the series started, I quite liked Anita as a somewhat curmudgeonly young woman with issues. By the end I was just fed up with her, even if it supposedly wasn't her fault. I've never been sure whether this was the intention of the series right from the start, if the author had always intended it to turn out this way, or if the series was meant to finish at book 8, but the author carried on dragging it out and took it in a very different direction, because she thought it would be more popular. Personally, I'd have been quite happy for it to finish at book 8. In fact, for me, it does. although I think it's up to about book 20 now or something. For me, book 8 will always be the end. So that's it for this video, or it's going to get ridiculously long. Well done if you made it this far, and thank you for watching. Bye!